The Nexus Tower was not so much a building as it was a monument to cold, hard ambition, a shard of smoked glass and obsidian steel piercing the New York City skyline. Inside, the air itself felt different, filtered and chilled to a precise temperature, carrying the faint, sterile scent of ionized electricity and the subtle, expensive fragrance of the cleaning solutions that kept its surfaces gleaming with an inhuman perfection. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the ventilation system and the distant, rhythmic hum of the server farms in the building's core, the digital heartbeat of a global empire. In this cathedral of code, power was a palpable force, radiating from the corner offices and flowing through the fiber-optic cables embedded in its walls like a circulatory system. It was a world designed for titans, for men who moved markets with a single keystroke, and it had no room or regard for the phantoms that drifted through its halls after dark, the invisible workforce that erased the day's smudges and restored its pristine, unblemished facade before the sun rose again. Among these nocturnal ghosts was Elara Vance. To any casual observer, she was just another part of the building's automated systems, a woman in a simple gray uniform pushing a cart of muted plastic and metal. Her movements were a study in efficiency, each wipe of her cloth, each spray of her bottle, executed with a practiced economy that left no streaks, no residue, no trace of her presence. But beneath this veneer of quiet servitude, a mind of extraordinary power churned in relentless motion. While her hands polished the gleaming chrome fixtures of a deserted executive washroom, her thoughts were a whirlwind of cryptographic patterns and complex algorithms. She saw the world in layers of data, in systems and vulnerabilities. This janitorial job, with its crushing anonymity and monotonous routine, was both a prison and a sanctuary. It was the price she paid for a life she never chose, a penance for a tragedy that had shattered her world, forcing her to trade a fellowship at MIT and a future at the forefront of cybersecurity for the quiet, desperate struggle of keeping her family from sinking completely. The sharp antiseptic smell of the glass cleaner she used was a constant, unwelcome trigger, a chemical scent that instantly transported her back to the bleached white corridors of the long-term care facility where her father now lived. In her mind's eye, she could see him, a brilliant software engineer whose hands once flew across a keyboard, now sitting by a window, his gaze distant, his mind a labyrinth of thoughts he could no longer articulate. His world, and hers, had collapsed 5 years ago, when his small, innovative startup was devoured in a hostile takeover. The stress, the betrayal, and the financial ruin had caused a massive stroke, silencing one of the great unsung minds of his generation. Every dollar Elara earned mopping floors and emptying trash cans went towards his care, towards the quiet dignity of a private room, towards the hope that some flicker of the man he was might one day return. This was her singular, unyielding motivation, a silent promise she renewed every time the weight of her reality threatened to crush her spirit. She endured the invisibility because he needed her to. The oppressive silence of the top floor was shattered by the chime of a private elevator, its doors sliding open with a soundless hydraulic hiss. Julian Thorne, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, strode into the war room as if he owned the very air within it. He was a man sculpted from success and sheer, unapologetic arrogance. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of dark Italian wool that likely cost more than Elara's annual salary, his watch a sliver of platinum and sapphire that caught the recessed lighting with a dismissive glint. But it was his presence that commanded the space. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his eyes scanning the room not to see the people in it, but to assess their utility. His subordinates, a collection of impeccably dressed vice presidents and project leads, straightened their postures, their faces a mixture of fear and adoration. Thorne didn't acknowledge them with a greeting. His arrival was acknowledgement enough. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted, crackling with a nervous energy that revolved entirely around him. He was the sun, and they were merely planets caught in his immense gravitational pull. The war room was Thorne's personal theater of conquest. Its far wall was a single, massive, interactive whiteboard, currently alive with a chaotic scrawl of encrypted code fragments, financial projections, and strategic diagrams mapping a corporate assault. On the opposite wall, a video conference display showed the faces of a dozen international investors, their expressions a carefully composed blend of skepticism and greed. Thorne was in his element, a master puppeteer performing for his most important audience. He paced before the whiteboard, using a stylus to circle, slash, and connect pieces of the digital puzzle. His voice was a smooth, confident baritone, laced with the kind of corporate jargon designed to sound brilliant while saying very little. He spoke of synergy, of leveraging assets, of aggressive market penetration, weaving a narrative of inevitable victory. The mess on the board was a visual testament to his strategy, the intellectual property of a smaller competitor, Ethereum, which he was in the process of dissecting and absorbing. A corporate raid disguised as innovation. This is a story you won't want to miss. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We love seeing our global audience. And if you enjoy stories where justice is served, make sure you're subscribed. The stage is set for a confrontation that will change everything. Ilara, following her nightly route, quietly pushed her cart into the war room to empty the trash receptacles. Her presence was meant to be ambient, as unnoticeable as the hum of the air conditioning. She kept her head down, her focus entirely on her task, a practice technique to make herself as small and invisible as possible. But tonight, she was not invisible enough. Thorne, in the middle of a particularly grandiose statement, paused. A cruel, performative smirk curled his lips. He saw her, not as a person, but as a prop. He gestured towards her with a dismissive flick of his wrist, a theatrical flourish for the benefit of his audience on the screen. His voice boomed in the silent room, dripping with a condescension so thick it was suffocating. "Don't mind us," he announced, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Our dedicated night staff, ensuring the path to progress is always clean." A few of the investors chuckled, their faces on the screen contorting into sycophantic smiles. Thorne's smirk widened. He pointed his stylus at the complex array of code on the whiteboard. "Just clean this meaningless mess off the board when you're done," he commanded, his gaze sweeping over Ilara as if she were a piece of furniture. "It's probably more complex than anything you'll ever have to think about." The words hung in the air, a casual, brutal act of public humiliation designed to reinforce his own perceived superiority. For a moment, Ilara froze, her hand hovering over a wastebasket. The insult struck her, but not in the way Thorne intended. It wasn't shame that washed over her, but a sudden, shocking clarity, as if a lightning bolt had illuminated the entire landscape of her life. A fury, cold and solid, began to crystallize in her veins. It wasn't for herself that she felt this rage, but for the man sitting in a quiet room miles away, the man who had taught her to see the beauty in complex systems, the father whose legacy was being mocked by the very man who had destroyed him. Her gaze lifted from the floor and settled on the whiteboard. The meaningless mess was anything but. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of pattern recognition, instantly processed the data. It was not just code, it was a stolen algorithm. She recognized the elegant, efficient syntax, the unique digital fingerprint of the lead coder at Ethereum, a smaller, more ethical company Thorne was clearly targeting. The image of her father, struggling to form a single word, flashed in her mind, and her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The world seemed to slow down. The quiet hum of the servers, the nervous breathing of Thorne's subordinates, the smug look on his face, it all faded into a distant murmur. There was only the board, and the silent, furious purpose that now consumed her. The years of forced invisibility, of swallowed pride, of quiet grief, coalesced into a single point of action. She straightened up, and for the first time her posture lost its submissive slump. She placed her cleaning bottle on the cart with a soft, deliberate click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. Then she turned. She did not look at Julian Thorne. She did not look at the stunned faces of his team. Her eyes, now blazing with an intensity no one in that room had ever seen, were fixed on the stolen code. With a calm, measured grace that was utterly at odds with her janitor's uniform, she took a single, determined step towards the room's main console. The game had just changed. Her fingers, which moments before had been methodically wiping down a stainless steel trash can, now moved with an unnatural velocity and purpose over the holographic keyboard projected onto the console's surface. The air in the war room, already thick with tension, seemed to solidify, becoming a heavy, unbreathable medium. Each keystroke was a silent, digital declaration of war, a soundless thunderclap that echoed in the stunned minds of every person present. The VPs, men and women accustomed to commanding billion-dollar divisions, now looked like statues, their faces frozen in a collective mask of disbelief. They exchanged furtive, panicked glances, their eyes asking the same silent question: what is happening? Who is this woman? Julian Thorne, for his part, remained standing by the whiteboard, the stylus still clutched in his hand, a useless scepter for a king whose kingdom was suddenly under siege from the most unexpected of quarters. His mind, usually a high-speed processor of market data and strategic threats, had short-circuited. He could not compute this variable. The janitor. It was an anomaly so far outside his operational parameters that his entire system had crashed, leaving only a blank screen of pure, unadulterated shock. The main screen, which had displayed the smug, expectant faces of the international investors, flickered and changed. The video conference grid shrank to a small window in the corner, and in its place, a cascade of green and white text began to pour down the screen, mirroring Alara's actions. It wasn't random typing. It was a structured, elegant demolition. She was not just deciphering the code Thorne had dismissed as a mess. She was reassembling it, annotating it, and laying its secrets bare for the world to see. The investors, now trapped in their little digital box, leaned forward, their expressions shifting from sycophantic amusement to rapt, greedy attention. They were witnessing something far more valuable than Thorne's polished presentation, a live, real-time masterclass in corporate espionage. The code fragments on the whiteboard, which Thorne had used as a prop for his own genius, were now being organized by an invisible hand, locking into place with satisfying clicks that were only implied, yet felt by everyone in the room. The mess was resolving itself into a coherent, terrifyingly elegant structure, a beautiful and stolen piece of architecture. Alara's mind was a silent, serene storm. The years of suppressed intellect, the countless nights spent studying cryptographic theory after her grueling shifts, the legacy of her father's teachings, it all came flooding back, not as a chaotic torrent, but as a perfectly channeled river of pure logic. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a calm, patient guide from a time before his own mind became a prison. Every system has a language, Alara. You just have to listen for its grammar, its rhythm. The vulnerabilities are always in the pauses, the exceptions to the rule. She wasn't just breaking a code, she was having a conversation with its creator. She could feel the digital fingerprint of the original programmer, a man named Dr. Kenji Tanaka of Ethereum, a coder known for his minimalist, almost poetic syntax. She recognized his work instantly, a signature as unique as a painter's brushstroke. Thorne hadn't just stolen a product. He had plagiarized a masterpiece, and in his arrogance, he had failed to even understand the language in which it was written. The lines of code on the screen continued to build, forming a complete picture. Alara isolated a specific block, a highly complex predictive algorithm that was the core of Ethereum's upcoming product launch, a project codenamed Oracle. With a few more keystrokes, she overlaid publicly available data streams, market trends, shipping manifests, patent filings, and the algorithm came to life. On the screen, it began to generate astoundingly accurate projections for supply chain logistics, predicting disruptions with a 98.7% accuracy rate, a feat that would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to any global corporation. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Thorne's team, the so-called best and brightest, stared at the screen, their faces paling. They had been working on cracking this for weeks, and this woman, this ghost in a gray uniform, had just reverse-engineered it in less than 2 minutes. She was showing them not only what they had stolen, but also that they were incompetent thieves. She stopped typing. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air and arrogance out of the room. Ilara slowly turned her head, not to look at Thorne but to address the camera, her gaze piercing through the screen to meet the eyes of the investors. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried a weight that 1,000 of Thorne's booming pronouncements could never achieve. It was calm, precise, and utterly devastating. "This isn't your code," she stated, the words cutting through the silence like shards of glass. "It belongs to Ethereum. Specifically, it's the core of their Oracle AI, developed by Dr. Kenji Tanaka. You've stolen a predictive logistics algorithm." She paused, letting the accusation land with the force of a physical blow. The faces in the small video window were a portrait of corporate panic. The greed had vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating fear of being associated with a scandal of this magnitude. Then, she turned her gaze, slowly, deliberately, until it locked with Julian Thorne's. For the first time, he was truly seeing her, and the reflection he saw in her eyes was not of a janitor, but of a judge. A cold fire burned in her stare, a lifetime of injustice focused into a single, unblinking point of light. "But your bigger problem," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout, "is that you're not very good at being thieves." She gestured back to the screen with a subtle nod of her head. "Dr. Tanaka is a genius. He builds his systems with layers of redundancy and security. He knew someone might try to steal this." Her fingers moved once more, a final surgical strike across the keyboard. A new line of code was highlighted on the screen, a line that Thorne's team had clearly overlooked, dismissing it as a benign piece of annotation or redundant script. It looked harmless, a digital footnote in a much larger text. "He left a back door," Ilara announced, her voice resonating with the finality of a verdict. "A kill switch. This line right here." She pointed. And on the screen, the highlighted code pulsed with a soft, ominous red glow. It allows the original administrator, Dr. Tanaka, to send a single encrypted packet that would not just disable this algorithm, but cause a cascade failure across any network it's integrated with. You haven't stolen a weapon. You've willingly installed a Trojan horse at the very heart of your entire system. The implications of her words descended upon the room like a physical weight. She was telling them that their grand prize, the jewel of their conquest, was a bomb, and they had just hardwired it into their own mainframe. The potential damage wasn't just millions in lost intellectual property. It was the potential collapse of nexus dynamics, entire global data infrastructure. It was corporate annihilation. Thorne's face, which had been a mask of shock, began to contort, the blood draining from it until his skin was a waxy, pallid shade of gray. The illusion of control, the very foundation of his identity, had been shattered in front of his investors, his team, his entire world. The smirk was gone, replaced by a twitching, snarling grimace of pure, unadulterated fury. The humiliation was a physical thing, a poison flooding his system. He had been undone, not by a corporate rival, not by a market crash, but by the janitor. The sheer existential absurdity of it was more than his ego could bear. A strangled, guttural sound escaped his lips, a noise of pure, animal rage. His carefully crafted persona of the untouchable tech titan dissolved in an instant, revealing the screaming, insecure tyrant beneath. "Security!" he roared, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, desperate fury that betrayed his complete loss of control. "Get her out of here! Get this nobody out of my building now!" 2 security guards, drawn by the commotion, burst into the room, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. They saw their CEO, a man they usually only glimpsed from a respectful distance, red-faced and trembling with rage, pointing a shaking finger at a woman in a janitor's uniform who stood perfectly still and calm at the main console. The scene made no sense. They looked from Thorne's contorted face to Alara's composed, almost serene expression, and for a moment, they hesitated. But the CEO's second roar, louder and more frantic than the first, spurred them into action. "Did you hear me? Throw her out! Now!" They moved towards Alara, their heavy boots sounding unnaturally loud on the polished marble floor. They were large men, trained to handle physical threats, but they approached her with a strange reluctance, as if they sensed they were on the wrong side of something they couldn't comprehend. Alara offered no resistance. As their hands, hesitant but firm, took hold of her arms, she felt a strange and profound sense of release. The fear that had been her constant companion for 5 long years, fear for her father, fear of discovery, fear of failure, had been cauterized by the cold fire of her actions. She had spoken, she had been seen. The invisible woman had cast a shadow so large it had eclipsed the Sun King himself. As they led her from the war room, she held her head high, her back straight. She did not look at Thorne again. Her final glance was at the faces of his subordinates, the VPs and project leads. In their eyes, she saw not contempt, but a dawning, terrified respect. They were looking at her as if she were a force of nature, a ghost who had risen from the floorboards to pass judgment upon their house. The spell of Julian Thorne's power was broken, and she was the one who had broken it. They marched her through the silent, opulent corridors of the top floor, a strange procession of the fallen queen and her reluctant executioners. The gleam of the polished chrome, the scent of the expensive air, the hushed reverence of the space, it all seemed like a distant memory from another life. Her mind was already moving on, processing the night's events, calculating the next steps. Being fired was a certainty, a consequence she had accepted the moment she walked to that console. But as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her off from the world she had just upended, she knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The humiliation Thorne had intended for her had become his own, and in doing so, he had handed her the one thing she had lost 5 years ago, a purpose beyond mere survival. He had reminded her not of what she was, a janitor, but of who she was, a weapon. The descent in the glass elevator was a slow, surreal journey back to the ground. Far below, the lights of New York City spread out like a galaxy of fallen stars, a world indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded 47 stories above it. The guards escorted her to a side exit, a sterile service door that led into a dark, windswept alley. One of them pushed a small cardboard box into her hands, containing the few personal items from her locker, a worn copy of a book on quantum computing, a faded photo of her and her father smiling in happier times, and a spare phone charger. "I'm sorry, ma'am," one of the guards mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. Then they were gone, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind her, leaving her alone in the cold, damp darkness. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm she had just unleashed. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to ebb away, and the cold reality of her situation washed over her like an icy wave. The night air, thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, felt thin and sharp in her lungs. She was unemployed. The steady, if meager, paycheck that paid for her father's care, for the specialized nurses, and the quiet room with a view of the garden was gone. A tremor of pure, gut-wrenching panic seized her. What had she done? In a single act of defiance, born of pride and a long-dormant sense of justice, had she just condemned the one person she had sworn to protect? The image of her father, frail and dependent, flashed in her mind, and a wave of nausea and self-recrimination threatened to buckle her knees. For a moment, the weight of her choice was a crushing, unbearable burden, and she leaned against the cold brick wall of the alley, the rough surface, a grounding, painful reality. She closed her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The name of the company, Nexus Dynamics. It echoed in the sudden emptiness of her mind, not as a new piece of information, but as a half-remembered nightmare. And Thorne's face, that specific brand of smiling, predatory arrogance, it was familiar, not from the news, not from business magazines, but from a deeper, more painful place. A memory, fragmented and buried under years of grief and exhaustion, began to surface. She saw her mother, crying silently at their kitchen table, a stack of legal documents in front of her. She heard her father's voice, not the strong, confident voice of the brilliant engineer, but a strained, broken whisper on the phone, talking about a hostile takeover, about corporate raiders, about a CEO who was gutting their company for its patents. The pieces began to click into place, slow and agonizing, like the tumblers of a massive, rusted lock. Her eyes snapped open. The panic was gone, replaced by a horrifying, clarifying certainty. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking, not from fear but from a dawning seismic rage. She typed Nexus Dynamics hostile takeover, and the name of her father's small, beloved startup, Innovate Paradigm. The search results flooded the screen, old articles from 5 years ago. And there he was, a younger Julian Thorne, smiling triumphantly on the steps of the courthouse, his arm around his lawyers. The headline read, Nexus Dynamics finalizes acquisition of Innovate Paradigm, citing strategic asset integration. Strategic asset integration. That's what they called it. They had called it progress. But she knew what it was. It was the theft that had broken her father's spirit, the stress that had triggered the stroke, the corporate violence that had shattered their family and derailed her entire life. It wasn't a coincidence. The man who had mocked her tonight was the very same man who had orchestrated her family's ruin. A new kind of strength, cold and diamond hard, flooded her veins. This was no longer about a single public insult. It was no longer about a stolen algorithm from a competing company. This was about a debt of justice that was 5 years overdue. The fight wasn't over, it had just been declared. Her personal humiliation was merely the final piece of evidence, the catalyst that had reawakened a part of her she thought was gone forever. Thorne had made the gravest mistake of his life. He had not just underestimated the janitor, he had forgotten the daughter of the man whose life he had destroyed. He thought he had thrown her out into the darkness, but he had only pushed her out of her cage and into the battlefield, armed with a truth he had long since buried and forgotten. She looked up from the alley, towards the top of the Nexus Tower, a single glowing light in the sky where Thorne was likely still reeling. He had no idea what was coming for him. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed resources, access, and guidance. There was only one person she could turn to, someone who had seen her potential before the world had forced her to hide it away. Dr. Alistair Finch, her former mentor at MIT, the man who had called her withdrawal from the cybersecurity fellowship a criminal waste of a generational talent. She hadn't spoken to him in years, ashamed of her circumstances, of the janitor's uniform that had replaced her lab coat. But shame was a luxury she could no longer afford. She walked out of the alley and onto the street, hailing a cab with a newfound sense of urgency. The destination was not her small, cramped apartment, but the sprawling Gothic campus of Columbia University, where Dr. Finch now held an endowed chair in the computer science department. The journey across the city was a journey back in time, a pilgrimage to reclaim the person she was meant to be. Dr. Finch's office was the complete antithesis of the Nexus Tower. It was a chaotic, welcoming den of intellectual curiosity, crammed from floor to ceiling with teetering stacks of books, disassembled computer towers, and whiteboards covered in equations that looked like a form of alien calligraphy. The air smelled of old paper, ozone from the humming electronics, and strong, freshly brewed coffee. Dr. Finch himself was a man who seemed to be composed of tweed wild gray hair and a perpetual look of distracted brilliance. He looked up from a complex schematic as she entered, his eyes widening in surprise, then clouding with a deep, paternal concern. "Ilara, my God, child, what are you doing here at this hour? Are you all right?" He saw the exhaustion etched on her face, the faint smell of industrial cleaning fluid clinging to her clothes, and his expression softened with a sadness he had felt 5 years earlier. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or apologies for her long absence. The time for that was over. She walked directly to the whiteboard in his office, picked up a marker, and in a few swift, precise movements, wrote out the core of the stolen Ethereum algorithm from memory. She then circled the kill switch vulnerability, adding a quick annotation of how it could be exploited to trigger a network-wide cascade failure. She explained what had happened in the Nexus Tower, her voice steady and devoid of emotion, laying out the facts with the clinical precision of an incident report. She described Thorne's arrogance, the public humiliation, and her own sudden, explosive revelation. She recounted every detail, not as a victim seeking pity, but as a strategist outlining the initial skirmish of a much larger war, a war she now intended to win at any cost. Dr. Finch listened in absolute silence, his initial concern transforming into a look of awe and then into a slow-burning academic fury. He walked to the board, his fingers tracing the lines of code she had written. "He called this a mess?" he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief and professional outrage. "This is elegant. It's beautiful. And you did this in his boardroom? In front of his investors?" He turned to face her, and for the first time he wasn't looking at the brilliant student he had lost, but at a seasoned, battle-hardened operative who had just emerged from deep cover. He saw the steel in her eyes, the unshakable resolve that had been forged in the crucible of personal tragedy and public humiliation. He understood that she had not come to him for comfort or for a job recommendation. She had come to him for an arsenal. Ilara finally let the last piece fall into place, the one that transformed the entire equation from a matter of professional ethics into a deeply personal vendetta. "It's him, Alistair," she said, her voice dropping, the name a toxic taste in her mouth. "Julian Thorne. He's the one who destroyed my father's company. He's the reason my father is in a hospital bed, unable to speak my name. This isn't just about stolen code. This is about everything." The confession hung in the air between them, a declaration that changed the entire nature of her request. This was not about whistleblowing. It was about retribution. It was about a daughter seeking to reclaim her father's stolen legacy and to bring down the Titan who had built an empire upon the ruins of her family's life. A quest for justice that had just found its general. Dr. Finch's face hardened, the academic's gentle curiosity replaced by the grim determination of an ally. He had known Ilara's father, had respected his work immensely, and had mourned the loss of such a brilliant mind. The connection she had just revealed lit a fire in him as well. He walked over to a heavy, locked metal cabinet in the corner of his office, a relic from a bygone era of Cold War-era data security. He spun the dial on the combination lock, the clicks echoing in the quiet room. "Julian Thorne has made a great many enemies in his climb to the top," Dr. Finch said, his voice low and serious as he swung the heavy door open. "He believes money and power make him invincible, that the people he crushes simply disappear. He has forgotten that data, like history, has a very long memory. Inside the cabinet were not books, but rows of encrypted hard drives and secure servers, a private archive of his own research into the dark underbelly of the tech world." He pulled out a single, slate-gray, encrypted drive and placed it on the desk between them. "For years I've been tracking the corporate raiders, the asset strippers who masquerade as innovators. Thorne is one of the worst. His digital trail is buried under layers of shell corporations, legal firewalls, and NDAs. But nothing is truly untraceable." He looked directly at Ilara, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective loyalty. "I have the archives, the raw data, the back doors into old financial systems. But I don't have your talent, Ilara. I have the library. You are the one who can read the forbidden books." He pushed the drive towards her. "You want to go to war with Julian Thorne? Fine, let's give you the ammunition you need. Let's go find the proof that will not just expose him, but erase him completely." The investigation had begun. The campus was silent as she left Dr. Finch's office just before dawn, the encrypted hard drive feeling as heavy as a weapon in her bag. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the clouds in shades of gray and pale purple. It was a new day. For 5 years she had lived her life in the shadows, a ghost haunting the hallways of her own past, her only goal, the quiet preservation of what little she had left. But now the sun was rising on a different world, a world in which she was no longer the janitor, no longer the victim. She was the hunter, and the ghost that was about to haunt Julian Thorne's life was not the specter of a lowly cleaning lady he had insulted, but the fully armed and incredibly brilliant daughter of a man he had wronged long ago. She walked into the morning light, her purpose clear, her resolve absolute, ready to begin the meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless process of dismantling an empire. Her first stop was not home, but a small 24-hour electronics store in a quiet corner of the city. She used the last of her emergency cash to purchase a burner laptop, several encrypted USB drives, and a series of network adapters. She knew better than to use her own devices or any public network. From this moment on, she was operating under a new set of rules, the rules of digital warfare. Every connection had to be anonymous, every piece of data triply encrypted, every move she made untraceable. She was building a new identity, a digital ghost designed for a single purpose, to infiltrate the past and weaponize it. She found a quiet, secluded corner in the back of a university library, a place where she could work for hours undisturbed, just another student hunched over a laptop, lost in her studies. But her study was of a singular subject, the complete and total deconstruction of Julian Thorne. She plugged in Dr. Finch's drive, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she navigated through layers of security he had put in place. It was a test, and she passed it with an ease that would have made her old mentor smile. The drive opened up to reveal a labyrinth of data, a treasure trove of financial records, sealed court documents, and archived communications from dozens of corporate takeovers spanning the last decade. It was a digital graveyard of the companies Thorne had consumed. Her father's company, Innovate Paradigm, was just one of many. A cold, methodical anger settled in her heart. This was bigger than just her family. Thorne wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a serial predator, and she was about to become the force that would finally hold him accountable for all of it. She began the painstaking work of sifting through the data, her mind entering a state of hyper-focus that shut out the rest of the world. The library around her faded away. The quiet rustle of pages, the distant hum of the lights, the passage of time itself, it all disappeared. There was only the data, the patterns, the connections. She started with the Innovate Paradigm files, cross-referencing dates, financial transfers, and internal memos. She found evidence of stock manipulation, of shell companies created just days before the takeover to devalue her father's shares, of key employees being bribed to leak internal data. It was a textbook corporate raid, executed with brutal, surgical precision. Each new file was another nail being hammered into Thorne's coffin, another piece of the mosaic of his crimes. The image of her father, sitting by the window in the care facility, was a constant presence in her mind. But it was no longer a source of despair. It was a beacon of motivation. Every line of fraudulent code she uncovered, every deceitful contract she unearthed, was a blow struck in his name. She was not just seeking vengeance for herself, she was fighting for him, for the voice he had lost, for the justice he had been denied. This was her new job, her true calling. She was no longer cleaning the messes of the powerful, she was exposing them. The work was slow, demanding, and mentally exhausting, but with every passing hour, her plan began to take shape. A complex algorithm of retribution, designed with the same elegance and precision as the code she had once written. The hunt for the ultimate proof, the one piece of irrefutable evidence that would bring everything crashing down, had officially begun. The university library became her sanctuary and her war room, a place of profound silence that belied the storm she was unleashing in the digital realm. The faint, musty scent of old books and polished wood was a world away from the cold, metallic aroma of the Nexus Tower, and in this quiet anonymity she found a new kind of power. She worked with a relentless, monastic discipline, fueled by black coffee and the burning image of her father's stolen future. The encrypted drive Dr. Finch had given her was not merely a collection of files. It was a digital ghost town, the archived remains of every company Julian Thorne had ever consumed. Each folder was a tombstone, each file a whispered story of a dream dismantled, a legacy erased. Her fingers moved across the keyboard of the burner laptop with a fluid, predatory grace, her mind sifting through terabytes of data, searching for the ghost of Innovate Paradigm. She began by constructing a timeline, a meticulous, day-by-day chronicle of the 6 months leading up to her father's ruin. She cross-referenced SEC filings with archived news reports, shareholder communications with leaked internal emails. A pattern began to emerge, not of a simple business acquisition, but of a coordinated, multifaceted assault. She discovered the creation of 3 offshore shell corporations, all registered in the Cayman Islands, just weeks before the takeover bid was announced. These phantom entities, with names like Viridian Holdings and Apex Global Solutions, had no employees and no products. Their sole purpose, she quickly deduced, was to systematically purchase and short-sell Innovate Paradigm's stock, creating a vortex of artificial volatility that drove the share price into the ground. It was a classic pump-and-dump scheme, but executed with a level of sophistication that was nearly impossible to trace from the outside. The data streams flowed through her mind, not as dry numbers and legal jargon, but as a living narrative of betrayal. She unearthed encrypted email chains between Thorne's top legal counsel and a man named Marcus Thorne, Julian's less scrupulous younger brother, who was listed as the sole director of all 3 shell companies. The emails were a masterclass in plausible deniability, filled with coded language about market adjustments and portfolio balancing, but the underlying intent was clear. They were orchestrating a panic, creating the illusion that her father's financially sound, innovative company was on the verge of collapse. It was the digital equivalent of poisoning a well, and Thorne had done it with a chilling, detached efficiency, all while publicly praising Innovate Paradigm's potential. The hypocrisy was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of her throat. She worked for 3 days straight, sleeping only in short, fitful bursts in a library armchair, her dreams a chaotic swirl of code, and her father's fading smile. The deeper she dug, the more she realized the sheer scale of Thorne's malevolence. He hadn't just outmaneuvered her father, he had psychologically dismantled him. She found records of anonymous, targeted smear campaigns launched on investor forums and tech blogs, spreading rumors of internal strife and technological failures at Innovate Paradigm. These digital whispers, amplified by bots and paid influencers, had eroded investor confidence from the inside out. Her father, a brilliant engineer who believed in the inherent goodness of creation, had been utterly unprepared for a war fought with lies and shadows. He had tried to fight back with logic and facts, bringing a slide rule to a knife fight. Then she hit a wall, a digital firewall, thick and impenetrable. While Dr. Finch's archive was a treasure trove of public and semi-public records, the core of the operation, the direct communication, the smoking gun that unequivocally linked Julian Thorne to the illegal stock manipulation, was missing. The trail of the shell corporations went cold in a labyrinth of international banking laws, and the internal Nexus Dynamics servers from that era had been, according to the official records, decommissioned and physically destroyed. Thorne had been meticulous in scrubbing his history, leaving behind a perfectly sanitized version of events that would stand up to any conventional legal scrutiny. A wave of frustration, sharp and bitter, washed over her. She had the outline of the crime, the skeleton, but she lacked the heart, the irrefutable proof that would damn him forever. It was in that moment of near despair that her father's voice echoed in her memory, a lesson from long ago when she was just a child, struggling with a particularly difficult puzzle. "Don't just look at the pieces, Ilara," he had said, his voice warm and patient. "Look at the spaces between them. The story is always in what's missing." She took a deep breath, pushing away the frustration and refocusing her mind. What was missing? The human element. Thorne couldn't have executed this alone. He would have needed insiders, people within her father's own company. She began a new search, not for data, but for names. She cross-referenced the Innovate Paradigm employee list from 5 years ago with their current employment records. Most had scattered to the winds, but one name stood out: Arthur Gable, her father's chief financial officer and trusted friend. Gable had, according to public records, retired abruptly just 2 weeks after the takeover was finalized, citing personal health reasons. It was too clean, too convenient. Using a secure, encrypted search protocol, Ilara began to dig into Gable's life. She found that his quiet retirement was funded by a single, massive wire transfer of $7 million, originating from one of the Cayman Islands shell corporations, funneled through 2 other accounts, and finally deposited into his name. It was a payoff, a severance package for his silence. She found his current address, a modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburb in Westchester, a gilded cage purchased with the price of his betrayal. He was her missing piece, the man who knew where the digital bodies were buried because he had likely helped dig the graves. Approaching him would be a monumental risk. He had every reason to deny everything, to call the police, to protect the comfortable lie his life had become. She couldn't go as herself. The name Vance would send him running. She needed a new identity, a new pretext. Her mind, honed by years of seeing systems and their vulnerabilities, began to formulate a plan. She spent the next 24 hours not on code, but on social engineering. She created a believable online persona, a freelance financial journalist named Lena Petrova, complete with a professional-looking website, a portfolio of well-researched articles on corporate finance, and a LinkedIn profile with hundreds of connections. She was building a key to unlock Arthur Gable's silence, a key forged from deception and meticulous attention to detail. She initiated contact with a carefully worded email, writing as Lena Petrova. She claimed to be working on a long-form piece about the aggressive acquisition strategies of the early 2010s, positioning Innovate Paradigm as a case study. She praised Gable's financial acumen, citing specific, obscure details from his tenure that only someone who had done their homework would know. She didn't mention Thorne. She didn't mention fraud. She simply offered him a chance to tell his side of the story, to set the record straight on a brilliant company's final days. It was a baited hook, an appeal to the part of him that might still feel a flicker of pride in what he had helped build, and the shame of what he had allowed to be destroyed. For 2 days, there was no reply. The silence was agonizing. She began to think she had failed, that he was too scared, too comfortable to ever speak. Then, on the 3rd morning, a reply appeared in her encrypted inbox. It was short, cautious. "I don't talk about Innovate Paradigm. That part of my life is over." It was a rejection, but it wasn't a definitive one. The fact that he had replied at all meant the hook was set. She wrote back immediately, her tone respectful, empathetic. She spoke of legacy, of how history is written by the victors unless someone with the courage to speak up changes the narrative. She attached one of her fabricated articles, a poignant piece on how the human cost of corporate rating is often forgotten in the financial reports. She was playing on his conscience, gambling on the hope that a small part of the man her father had once trusted still existed beneath the layers of fear and guilt. Another day of silence passed. Then, a new message. A coffee shop. Public place. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. You come alone. The coffee shop was a sterile, generic chain cafe in a strip mall, a place designed for conversations that no one would ever overhear or remember. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugary syrup. Ilara, dressed in the smart, professional attire of Lena Petrova, felt a tremor of nervous energy in her hands as she waited. Arthur Gable entered exactly at 10. He was older than she remembered, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with a permanent weary anxiety. The confident, booming CFO from her childhood memories was gone, replaced by a ghost haunted by his own choices. He didn't recognize her, seeing only the persona she had so carefully constructed. He sat down, his eyes darting around the room, a man who had lived in fear for 5 long years. She began the conversation gently, sticking to her cover story, asking him about the early days of Innovate Paradigm. For a few minutes, a spark of the old Arthur Gable returned. He spoke with a genuine, sorrowful pride about the company's mission, about her father's genius, about the sense of family they had all shared. But when she carefully steered the conversation towards the takeover, the light in his eyes died, and the fear returned. He gave the official story, the sanitized version from the press releases. He was a man reading from a script he had been forced to memorize. Ilara knew she had to take a risk, to push past the facade. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I know about the shell companies, Arthur. I know about Viridian Holdings. And I know about the $7 million. The color drained from Gable's face. His coffee cup rattled in its saucer as a tremor ran through his hand. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a raw, naked panic. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Who sent you?" This was the critical moment, the pivot upon which her entire plan rested. She didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she slid a small, folded piece of paper across the table. On it, she had written a single line of code, a private joke, a small, elegant algorithm her father and Gable had designed together to calculate stock option vesting schedules, a piece of their shared history that no outsider could possibly know. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the familiar syntax. His breath hitched in his chest, and when he looked up at her, the years seemed to fall away, and he was finally seeing her. Not Lena Petrova. He was seeing the daughter of the man he had betrayed. A wave of shame so profound, it was almost a physical force washed over his features. His eyes welled with tears he had clearly held back for half a decade. "Ilara." He choked out, the name a confession and an apology all in one. The dam of his silence broke, and the truth came pouring out in a torrent of whispered, frantic words. He told her everything. He confessed to providing Thorne's team with internal financial projections, to helping them identify key shareholders who could be swayed. He had been blackmailed, he explained, threatened with a minor financial indiscretion from early in his career that Thorne's investigators had unearthed. The $7 million wasn't a bribe, he insisted, but a severance package tied to an ironclad, soul-crushing non-disclosure agreement. He was a trapped man, a coward, and he had lived with the shame of it every single day. Ilara listened without judgment, her own anger tempered by the pathetic, broken sight of the man before her. She didn't need his apology, she needed his knowledge. "The official servers were wiped, Arthur. I need to know if there were backups. Off-site, unofficial, something they might have missed." Gable's eyes, clouded with memory, suddenly sharpened with a flicker of recollection. "The ghost server," he whispered, his voice filled with a dawning awe, as if remembering a long-forgotten legend. "Your father was paranoid about data integrity. He insisted on a deep archive, an off-site, air-gapped mirror of everything. It was located in a decommissioned data center in New Jersey. Sub-Level 3. When Nexus took over, their tech team did a sweep, but the ghost server wasn't on any official schematic. They decommissioned the facility, but they never went deep enough. They might have just left it. This was it. This was the heart of the skeleton, the key to the entire kingdom. An air-gapped, forgotten server containing the unaltered, unsanitized truth of the Innovate Paradigm acquisition. Gable, his face a mixture of terror and a desperate need for redemption, drew a rough map on a napkin, detailing the old facility's layout, the security codes he still remembered, the exact location of the server rack. "It's a long shot, Ilara," he warned, his hands still trembling. "The place has been abandoned for years, and if Thorne ever found out..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the risks. But for Ilara, risk was no longer a deterrent. It was simply a variable in the equation of justice. She took the napkin, the crude map feeling like the most valuable document in the world. The following night, she put her plan into motion. Her years as a janitor had taught her more than just how to be invisible. They had taught her how buildings breathe, the rhythm of their security patrols, the blind spots in their camera systems, the logic of their service entrances. Dressed in a dark gray work uniform, complete with a stolen ID badge from a third-party maintenance contractor she had researched, she drove to the abandoned data center in New Jersey. The building was a concrete monolith, a decaying tomb of forgotten information, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The air was cold and still, the only sound the distant hum of the highway. Her heart pounded a steady, controlled rhythm in her chest, a mixture of fear and a cold, exhilarating sense of purpose. She bypassed the outer fence with a pair of bolt cutters, moving through the shadows with a practiced silence. The access code Gable had given her for a side maintenance door still worked, a testament to corporate negligence. The heavy steel door opened with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing a cavernous darkness that smelled of dust, decay, and chilled, stagnant air. Using a small flashlight, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The place was a time capsule, with old computer terminals and dusty office chairs left exactly as they were 5 years ago, a silent testament to the day the lights were turned off. She found the elevator and, using a maintenance key, descended to sub-level 3. The air in the sub-level was freezing, the original cooling systems for the server still running on a low, automated power cycle. The chamber was vast, filled with rows upon rows of silent, monolithic server racks, their indicator lights long since extinguished. It felt like walking through a graveyard of giants. Following Gable's map, she found Rack 7B in the far corner, a unit covered in a thick layer of dust. Behind a false panel at its base, she found it, the ghost server. It was a single, unmarked black box, still connected to a dedicated, independent power source, just as her father, in his infinite paranoia and wisdom, had designed. Her hands trembled slightly as she connected her burner laptop to its service port. The screen came to life, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought an alarm would sound, that the whole world would come crashing down on her. But there was only silence. She bypassed the server's archaic security protocols in less than a minute, her fingers dancing across the keys. And then she was in. The file directory was a perfect, pristine copy of the Innovate Paradigm network as it had existed on the final day before the takeover. It was all there. Every email, every financial document, every line of code her father had ever written. She began a targeted search, looking for any file that contained Julian Thorne's name. The search returned dozens of results, but one file, buried deep in a folder marked Project Nightingale Executive Comms, made her blood run cold. It was a video file. The file name was a simple timestamp. She clicked play. The image was grainy, a recording of a video conference call. A younger, even more arrogant Julian Thorne filled the screen, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. He was talking to his legal team, his voice slick with triumph. "The board folded like a cheap suit," he boasted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "And Vance, the brilliant engineer, he still thinks this is a merger of equals." He let out a short, barking laugh. "We're not merging with him. We're gutting him. We'll take the patents, dissolve the company, and he'll be lucky to walk away with enough to cover his legal fees. Let the old man retire and play with his algorithms in his garage. His life's work is mine now." Ilara stared at the screen, her body turning to ice. Hearing him say her father's name, hearing the casual, dismissive cruelty, the utter lack of humanity, It was like a physical blow. This was it, the irrefutable proof. Not just evidence of a crime, but a window into the black, empty soul of the man who had orchestrated her family's destruction. The video was the smoking gun, the murder weapon, the confession, all rolled into one. She quickly initiated the transfer, her mind a whirlwind of cold, furious clarity. The progress bar on the screen, slowly filling as the file copied to her encrypted drive, felt like the timer on a bomb she was about to detonate. The rage she felt was no longer hot. It had been compressed into something dense and powerful, a diamond of pure, unyielding resolve. As the file transfer completed, she disconnected her laptop, replaced the false panel, and wiped away any trace of her presence. She moved back through the silent, dark corridors of the data center, the encrypted drive in her pocket feeling like a talisman of immense power. She had the weapon. She had the truth. As she emerged from the building into the pre-dawn gloom, the first pale light of morning was breaking on the horizon. She looked east, in the direction of New York City, towards the Nexus Tower that still pierced the skyline like a black needle. Her plan began to form, not as a vague notion of revenge, but as a precise, multi-stage operation. She knew her target. Now she had to choose her battlefield. The annual Nexus Dynamics shareholder meeting was in 2 weeks. It was Thorne's biggest stage, a globally live-streamed event where he would boast about his successes. It would be his theater of triumph. And she was going to burn it to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was a universe unto itself, a self-contained galaxy of immense wealth and power. The air was thick with the scent of money, a complex fragrance of expensive perfume, aged leather from $1,000 briefcases, and the faint, clean aroma of starched linen. A low, reverent murmur filled the space, the sound of hundreds of the world's most influential investors and journalists, speaking in hushed, expectant tones. Above them, chandeliers dripped with crystals like frozen constellations, casting a warm, golden light upon the sea of dark, tailored suits. On the stage, a monolithic screen, 20 feet high, displayed the sleek, minimalist logo of Nexus Dynamics. This was Julian Thorne's coronation, his annual address to the shareholders, a masterfully orchestrated piece of theater designed to reinforce his image as a visionary, a titan, an untouchable king of the digital age. He walked onto the stage not to applause, but to a wave of pure, unadulterated awe, the kind reserved for men who don't just predict the future, but who own it. He smiled, a practiced, predatory gleam in his eyes, radiating a confidence so absolute it seemed to bend the very light around him. He was at the apex of his power, standing on a mountain built from the bones of his rivals, utterly oblivious to the fact that the entire mountain was about to be turned into a volcano beneath his feet. Miles away, in a sterile, anonymous hotel room she had paid for in cash, Ilara Vance sat before the glow of her burner laptop. Her command center was the antithesis of the opulent ballroom. It consisted of a small desk, a single chair, and a complex web of cables connecting her laptop to a series of routers and signal scramblers. The only sound was the quiet hum of the room's air conditioning and the steady, rhythmic beat of her own heart, a calm and powerful drum signaling the start of a war. She had a live feed of the shareholder meeting open in one window, watching Thorne pace the stage like a caged tiger about to be fed. She felt no fear, no anxiety, only a profound and chilling sense of clarity. The years of grief and suppressed rage had been forged into a single sharp instrument of purpose. In her mind, she saw her father, not as the broken man in the hospital bed, but as the brilliant, vibrant man he had been, the man who had taught her that the most elegant systems are built on a foundation of truth. Thorne's empire was an ugly, inefficient system built on a foundation of lies, and she was about to introduce a single, irrefutable piece of truth that would cause a total system collapse. She placed her fingers on the keyboard, her touch light and precise, and waited for the perfect moment, the precise second when his hubris reached its absolute peak. Thorn was in his element, his voice a smooth, captivating baritone that filled every corner of the grand ballroom. He spoke of record profits, of aggressive expansion, of a future dominated by Nexus dynamics. He pointed to a soaring graph on the screen behind him, a testament to his genius. "We have not just met the future," he declared, his arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous conquest. "We have acquired it." It was the perfect line, the pinnacle of his arrogance, the very moment Ilara had been waiting for. With a single silent keystroke, she executed the script she had spent a week perfecting. On the massive screen behind Thorn, the soaring graph of his success flickered, distorted, and then vanished. It was replaced by the grainy, time-stamped footage from the ghost server. The ballroom, which had been hanging on Thorn's every word, fell into a sudden, confused silence. The audio from the video file began to echo through the room's powerful sound system, Thorn's own voice, younger and dripping with a casual cruelty, filling the void. The board folded like a cheap suit, his recorded voice sneered. "And Vance, the brilliant engineer, he still thinks this is a merger of equals." The confusion in the ballroom curdled into a collective, audible gasp. On the stage, Julian Thorn froze, the triumphant smile on his face slackening into a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. He turned slowly, as if in a nightmare, to look at the screen behind him, at the ghost of his past self boasting about his crimes. His recorded voice continued, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of his carefully constructed reality. "We're not merging with him. We're gutting him. We'll take the patents, dissolve the company. His life's work is mine now." Before the audience could fully process the confession, the video was replaced by a new screen, a meticulously organized digital dossier. The names of the Cayman Islands shell corporations appeared, followed by flowcharts that traced the illegal stock manipulation with damning clarity. Bank statements materialized, showing the $7 million transfer to Arthur Gable. Then came the final exhibit, the stolen Ethereum code, displayed side by side with Dr. Kenji Tanaka's original, with the kill switch vulnerability highlighted in a pulsing, accusatory red. It was not an attack, it was a dissection, a clinical, irrefutable presentation of fact that laid bare the rotten core of Thorn's entire empire. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The low murmur of the crowd erupted into a cacophony of frantic, panicked noise. Journalists were typing furiously on their laptops, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens as they broke the story of the decade. Investors were on their phones, their voices sharp and urgent, as they screamed sell orders to their brokers. The members of the Nexus Dynamics board, seated in the front row, stared up at Thorn not with loyalty, but with the cold, murderous fury of men who had been betrayed and were now facing financial and legal ruin. Thorn himself seemed to shrink on the stage, the aura of power that had surrounded him evaporating like mist. His face, usually tanned and vibrant, had become a pale, waxy gray, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. He stumbled towards the microphone, his hand shaking, and managed to stammer a single word, "security." But it was a plea, not a command. He looked out at the sea of faces, searching for an ally, a friendly eye, but he found only 1,000 mirrors reflecting his own public execution. The king was naked, and his entire kingdom was watching him burn. The live stream was abruptly cut, the screen going black, but the damage was irreparable. The truth was out, a digital wildfire that was already consuming global news networks and financial markets. On the stage, Thorn finally collapsed, not from a physical blow, but from the sheer, crushing weight of his own hubris. He sank to his knees, a broken, pathetic figure in a suit that suddenly seemed 2 sizes too large, his grand theater of triumph, now the stage for his ultimate, public humiliation. Security guards, their faces grim, moved in and escorted him away, not with the deference shown to a CEO, but with the firm, impersonal grip reserved for a common criminal. The empire had fallen, not with a bang, but with a single, devastating keystroke that had simply turned on the lights in a very dark room. Type "justice" in the comments if you got chills when the truth finally appeared on that screen. Weeks later, the world was a different place. Julian Thorne was a pariah, his name a permanent fixture in headlines detailing the SEC investigations, the federal fraud charges, and the cascade of lawsuits that had buried him and what was left of Nexus Dynamics. The company's stock had been wiped out, its assets frozen, its name now a synonym for the very worst of corporate greed. Ilara watched the news from a quiet, sunlit room, not a hotel room, but a private suite, in the finest long-term care facility in the state. She sat by her father's bedside, holding his hand. His eyes, though still distant, seemed to hold a flicker of peace she hadn't seen in years. The money from the consulting fee and the substantial reward Ethereon had paid her for exposing the theft had ensured he would want for nothing for the rest of his life. She had not restored his mind, but she had restored his dignity. She had reclaimed his legacy, not by building what he had built, but by destroying the man who had torn it down. She leaned in and whispered to him, telling him the story of what she had done, and for a brief, miraculous moment, she felt a faint, responsive pressure from his hand in hers. Her new office at Ethereum was not on the top floor. It was in the heart of the building, a bright, open-plan space filled with whiteboards, collaborative workstations, and the energetic hum of brilliant minds working together. The air smelled of coffee and innovation. There were no corner offices, no monuments to ego. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, Ethereum's CEO, had created a culture of respect, not fear. He had not just offered Ilara a job. He had created a new division for her to lead, cybersecurity and ethical systems design. Her first project was to build a new type of corporate firewall, one designed not just to keep criminals out, but to ensure the company's own actions remained transparent and accountable. She had been given the power not just to protect, but to build something better, to use her extraordinary gifts to create a system founded on the principles her father had cherished. Her journey through the darkness was over. She had walked through the fire of humiliation and emerged not as a victim seeking vengeance, but as a guardian of integrity, a silent janitor who had finally cleaned up the one mess that truly mattered. If Ilara's incredible journey from underdog to powerhouse inspired you, show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this story with someone who needs to see it. And for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment, don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell.